Hello, Goodwin House, Alexandria. My name is Ryan Wixel, and I have 20 minutes of your time, apparently, to introduce myself a little bit and to get a conversation started. I am going to go without notes and really without a plan here because, like I said just a moment ago, my goal really is to start a conversation with you. And I want to learn about your life. I want to learn about what makes your day, what ruins your day, and everything that's brought you up to the point you are right now. And so I thought I would start by giving you some of that from my own life, where I was born and raised, and what got me here. So let me start with the present moment. And in case you don't know it already, I am a Master of Divinity student at Virginia Theological Seminary, right down the road from you in Alexandria. I'm now a senior officially. I've completed 2 years out of 3. It's a little windy here, apologize for that. But completed 2 years out of my 3, so 1 year from now I expect to be ordained as a priest in the Episcopal Church, in which case I will probably go back to serve a church in my home diocese of West Missouri. So it's the Kansas City area. But let me get started with my story. But first of all, I just want to say I really look forward to hearing you respond in kind if you're interested. And if anything in my story rings a bell with you or connects with you in some way, then I would love to hear that too. So I was born at a young age, surprisingly, in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. That is in the northeast corner of Oklahoma. My mom and dad had moved there just a year before I was born, and my dad took a job at Phillips Petroleum Company, which Bartlesville is kind of a company town, and it was all about the Phillips headquarters there. So my dad was a computer expert and had a good job, so we had a pretty solid middle class upbringing there in Bartlesville. Then when I was 3, my brother Brendan was born, and he's my only sibling to this day, and just had a pretty middle of the road kind of white picket fence upbringing there in Bartlesville. But that was the first 10 years of my life. Something very different happened after that. My dad, who we were all part of the Assemblies of God denomination. I probably should have mentioned that earlier, which is a Pentecostal church, speaking in tongues and lots of gifts of the Spirit and clapping hands and dancing around, so very lively. So that was our church that I was raised in. And when I was 10, my dad felt like he was being called into something more. That going to church was a good start, but that he was being called to be a pastor. So he enrolled in Oral Roberts University, which is a Pentecostal charismatic seminary just an hour south of us in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so we all moved down there, moved from a nice little 3-bedroom ranch home into a little 2-bedroom apartment in a big housing complex on the ORU campus. And it was different. It was quite a transition. We went from being pretty average in Bartlesville to being actually the wealthiest people that we knew, the wealthiest people in our neighborhood. Believe it or not, we had 3 cars, which was kind of obscene. We shouldn't have had 3 cars. We whittled that down to 2 after a year or so. But and our neighbors had 1 car or often no cars. And to make matters worse, often didn't have the money they needed for rent, for tuition, for food. In addition to that, it was a very diverse environment. I come from a very white town, a very white neighborhood, into a place where we were surrounded by people from Korea, African Americans, people from Africa, from the Caribbean, from every corner of the world and every background you can imagine. So it was a big transition for us, and but it was also a very formative time in our lives. And my dad worked full time. My mom worked full time as a teacher, English as a second language teacher. And sorry, there's a gnat flying around. And my brother and I went to school, of course, but my dad worked full time, or 30 hours a week anyway, while he was getting his degree, so he was very busy. Yeah, so that was 3 years. When I was 13, we looked around for a church for my dad to serve in as pastor, but didn't really get anywhere until he connected with a minister in Kansas City who was actually a Messianic Jewish rabbi. So you may not have heard of that before, or maybe you have, but my dad got a real interest in Jewish studies during his time in seminary, and had been making some connections, and met this man who had started a Messianic Jewish congregation in Kansas City. And after talking with him for a bit, the family decided to move to Kansas City to help him with that congregation. Now, Messianic Judaism, that is a whole other topic. It's something that I don't currently identify with, and I have some mixed feelings about, but I'll go ahead and explain it. I'll take just a moment to explain it. These folks are, many of them are Jewish people who were born and raised Jewish. Some of them were observant, some were not observant. And at some point along their journey, they found themselves believing in Jesus in a very similar way to Christians. And yet, they also discovered that they could continue observing their Jewish faith, continue identifying as Jewish, perhaps even being Torah observant, keeping kosher, things like that, worshiping on Friday evening, Saturday morning, worshiping with the Hebrew language, and celebrating festivals, Rosh Hashanah, Passover, Hanukkah, all of those things. And then a lot of Gentiles really felt a solidarity with this group as well, and joined in to be a part of this. And that was my family. We were Gentile. There's no Jewish blood in us that we are aware of. And so we were sort of, we were along for the ride. And that was another big transition. It was very liturgical, where I was not used to liturgical. I was not used to really structured worship. I was used to something much more free-flowing and more expressive that's typical in the Pentecostal tradition. And so, yeah, I learned a lot of Hebrew. I learned a lot of new songs, really cool songs, though. And there was even more dancing in the Messianic Jewish congregation than there was in my previous Pentecostal experience. So that was fun. A lot of circle dancing, a lot of joy, and just all kinds of different fun experiences in celebrating Hanukkah and spinning the dreidel and building a sukkah at Sukkot in the fall, having a Seder for Passover in the spring. It was wild, and there were some points it was really uncomfortable, and other points that it was fun. So that was my high school years, and all of that time, I had this thing in the back of my mind that maybe God was calling me to be a pastor in a similar way that he had called my dad. And because incidentally, his dad and his grandpa were both pastors as well. And so I had this sort of sense of destiny or dynasty or what have you, and maybe I'm supposed to be a pastor too. But that really was in the back of my mind. That was, I wasn't sure how I felt about that, and maybe I was making assumptions. So I had decided during my high school years that I liked architecture, and I thought it'd be fun to design houses and buildings and whatnot. So I pursued that. I got a scholarship at Kansas State University nearby, and a place to live and everything, and I graduated from high school, and I was just going to this big religious rally at the football stadium in Kansas City, just a couple weeks after I graduated from high school. It was in late May, I think. And I don't know what was happening in the service itself, what was being sung, what was being said. But regardless of that, I felt without a doubt in my mind or my heart, God speaking to me and saying, don't do that, go to a Christian college and study music. That was a little bit of a surprise to me, but not a complete surprise, because I had loved music my whole childhood. I'd studied piano, I'd studied saxophone, I was in band, things like that, and I had started leading worship with the guitar for my little youth group in the Messianic Jewish congregation, and so I'd had an inkling about that. But then God just dropped that word right down on me and said, go study music, go to a Christian college and study to be a music minister. So I did that and ended up at Evangel University in Springfield, Missouri, which is just down the road to the south from Kansas City. So they had an amazing music program there, and highly regarded. But interestingly, it was an Assemblies of God university. So here I was back in the Assemblies of God, the place that I had grown up in, the denomination that I'd grown up in. So there was a lot of familiarity there. So ended up getting a degree in saxophone performance and composition, and wrote some pieces for band and for orchestra and for ensemble and choir and things like that. Really had a lot of fun with that. And not long before, or shortly before graduating, I also met Christina, who's now my wife, and she was going to a Baptist college that was not far from where I was going to college. And she was also from Kansas City, so we were both making that same trip back and forth between Kansas City and Springfield, about 2.5 hours. And so we got married, I graduated in 2002. We got married in 2003 and started looking around for churches that would be interested in having me slash us in ministry there. Now, during this time, I'm sorry if this isn't perfectly chronological, but during this time, I had started leading the music services at a Southern Baptist church in town. They had a pretty traditional music presentation and wanted something a little bit more contemporary. Somehow we found each other, and they rolled the dice and hired a Pentecostal kid to lead a Baptist worship service, and that worked out really well. I was able to put together a team. I played the acoustic guitar and sang, and I had others who played electric guitar and bass and drums, and had backup singers and people playing hand percussion and things like that. And it was a lot of fun. And I learned a lot through that about leading a team. And but in the end of that, when that kind of wound down, we were looking for where we were going to go because that was part-time, looking for something full-time to get into. I was starting to get some ideas about how church could be more accessible to more people. Maybe the people who had not felt welcome in the past, how they could be welcomed in as well. And we'd also grown really attached to the downtown community in Springfield. And so just started dreaming about what a downtown church might look like. It's really open to everyone and has something for everyone, even if it's not of a religious nature. And then the second time in my life, God spoke straight to me. Second and final time so far. My wife Christina and I were sitting in a church service on a Sunday morning, and again, regardless of whatever was going on, whatever the sermon was about, I was just struck with this unavoidable message that God was saying, I don't want you to leave, I want you to stay here in Springfield, and I want you to plant that church. And I thought that was pretty amazing, and again, pretty unavoidable, irrefutable in my heart. And the church service ended, and Christina and I walked back to our car, got in the car, sat down. Before I even turned the engine on, I said, "So God just told me that we're supposed to stay here and plant the church." And Christina said, "He told me that too." And Christina's not any more liable to hear these word kinds of messages directly from God than I am. So it's pretty remarkable that we both heard it at the same time without communicating at all with each other. So that was a pretty clear directive, and it's a good thing it was something we wanted to do, because now we also had to do it and felt like we didn't have a choice. So we bought a house in Springfield. We started trying to make connections with people who are like-minded with us, met in house church groups, small groupings in each other's homes or in other borrowed spaces, and saved our money. And after a year or so, we were able to move into a space that we helped renovate ourselves, right in downtown Springfield. Now, Springfield is a college town, and so it's got a pretty lively downtown scene with a lot of nightclubs, bars and restaurants, art galleries, theaters, so on and so forth. And so we wanted something that would fit in with that vibe, that neighborhood. And this little place that we opened up had a coffee bar, very simple. Didn't even have an espresso machine, but we did our best to give, to provide some good drinks and some food that's really, really affordable. And we had a rotating art exhibit on the walls every month. We would change out the artwork on the walls. We would have musicians and bands come to play. We had a pretty decent stage for them, and really every kind of music. Didn't matter whether you're a Christian band or not a Christian band or whatever. If you want to come play, then we'll make it work. And it was really an unbelievable experience, because we were open Wednesday evening, Thursday evening, Friday evening, Saturday evening, for all of these different kinds of activities. Discussion groups was another big one, to just get to know each other and talk about the issues and what it means to be human. And then on Sunday morning, we would just open up for church, and we would have church in that same exact setting, in kind of a coffee house setting, extremely casual and very conversational. Even the sermons were conversational, a lot of question and answer, a lot of give and take. So we grew a little bit. We were completely independent of any denomination, and that was awesome at first. It was also hard to get money and hard to get support. So eventually we found a like-minded denomination that joined with us, that supported us, but they supported us in a tapering fashion. So after a couple of years with that denomination, and 4 to 5 years total, we ran out of money, and we couldn't pay our rent anymore, and we weren't really growing. We were kind of stagnating, and we were just tired. We were exhausted. We are thankful, because a lot of church planters end up jaded and hurt by their experience. And that wasn't us. It was a really positive experience all the way through, but it was exhausting. And it wasn't working. It wasn't growing anymore. So at the end of 2011, we felt like it was time to shut it down. And it was a great sadness in our lives, and also a relief. So many details I'm glossing over, but it's about almost time to wrap up. So we took about 1.5 years off of church. We just rested and stepped back to try to gain some perspective. But after about 1 year of that, we were feeling a bit unmoored, and feeling like we needed to recommit ourselves to a community. And it was at that time that my wife suggested that we visit Christ Episcopal Church in downtown Springfield, just a few blocks from where our church had been. we had partnered with them in an initiative at one point early in the church, and also Christina had been involved in an Episcopal community in grade school, so she had a certain comfort level with the Episcopal Church. We visited there, and it was a snowy Sunday morning, cold and snowy, and one of those mornings where you don't expect a lot of turnout. And no, there was about 50% of their usual turnout, which is a little depressing until apparently you see this pair of fresh young faces come in, myself and my wife, and everybody just latched onto us right away. So we felt very welcome, and we got a tour of the church, and it was just a really positive feeling for us. But that welcome didn't go away the next week when everyone was there and we were no longer quite as special as before. We felt like we were fully drawn in and that we belonged there. And that was another big transition for me, because as I said, the church plant was very informal and very casual and conversational, and this Episcopal church was formal, even a little bit upscale, and it felt rigid to me, and so that was another learning curve. But I did learn, and not long after that I felt that pull to pastoring again, like I had pastored. And that's something I sort of glossed over. You know, I'd felt that call to pastor, to ministry, to full-time ministry as a kid, and I ended up being the pastor of this church plant, almost unintentionally. And then that need came back to me again after it was all over, and I was part of this Episcopal community, and this community saw it in me too, apparently. And Christina encouraged me, and our rector encouraged me, and we started the discernment process. And to make a long story short, that's what's brought us here to Alexandria, to Virginia Theological Seminary. And of course, part of that seminary experience is CPE, Clinical Pastoral Education, which is exactly what brings me to you and to making this video, which has now run its course. So hopefully something that I've said in these 23 minutes or so has connected with you, and if you have the opportunity to share that connection with me, or to give me a similar rundown of your own life, it can be longer too if you want, you probably have more to say, then I greatly look forward to it. My email address is hello@ryanwicksell.com. That's just my name.com, RyanWicksell. So send me an email, I'll give you a call back, or we can communicate however you like, except in person, unfortunately. Maybe one day. But God bless you. I really look forward to connecting with you personally. Thanks.